everybody, and welcome. My name is Nicole Lamberson, and I trained as a physician assistant. I'm a member of the outreach team for the film Medicating Normal, and I host conversations like this one today. Our guest today is Dr. Pamela Wible. Did I say that right?
You did. Wible like Bible.
Okay. Dr. Wible is a family physician, and I invited her on today because she wrote a very brilliant article that I saw about informed consent that I definitely want to talk about. I also have followed your work, Dr. Wible, for some time just because I'm a physician assistant who became ill from psychiatric treatment. And I had no idea, actually, that when you are practicing medicine, that sort of the board of medicine is not on your side when you get sick or take psychiatric meds or go that route. I didn't know, and I learned that the hard way. And I know you write a lot about that too. So I wanted to discuss that today. And I also want to talk to you because a lot of our followers who like our film Medicating Normal were harmed by medical care. They trusted their doctors and they didn't get informed consent when they were prescribed medication. And they have righteous anger about that. And so I thought maybe having you on could sort of bridge the gap a little bit between angry patients and physicians. And you could fill in a little bit for us about, why physicians are the way they are, how they think, how they're trained. And maybe that can bridge the gap a little bit and we can understand the system better and both the patient and the doctor and everybody involved and why it's so sort of screwed up, if you will. But yeah. Welcome. And please, if I missed anything, tell everybody, I think, who doesn't know you, who you are, what you do, and that kind of thing, just as an introduction.
Okay, so I'm a family physician, 30 years now, though I just retired my license last October because as a little hobby, I started dealing with all these doctor suicides and I realized, wow, that's like a full-time job, like literally my side job of trying to deal with all the suicides. I now have over 1,700 doctor suicides that I have compiled and dealt with in the aftermath, leading eulogies and sort of dealing with the underlying medical corruption, medical mafia, whatever you want to call it, that leads to all these doctor suicides. And obviously that's sort of like a canary in the coal mine. Like when doctors are dying at this rate by their own hand, obviously something isn't working in the medical system. If the people that we're going to as patients are dying at 3 times the rate that patients are by suicide, the system is broken. And I also want to mention that both my parents are physicians. So I am turning 55 tomorrow, and I have been watching the medical profession for more than half a century in its devolution. So I have like a longitudinal view of what is happening, and I can speak to, what I've witnessed from the 1970s onward in this profession. And so I would say I can speak to the sort of victimization of both patients and physicians and other health professionals, as well as sort of like the mental health impacts that happen to all of us, patients, physicians, nurses, from working in a really toxic system that does not allow us to get the mental health care and the support that we need for, let's just face it, watching people suffer and die all day long is not like baking wedding cakes. Like this is really traumatic. And then I also want to mention that the way that I was able to salvage myself in my career and keep my heart and soul in my body and be able to sleep at night is that I opened my own practice. And I did that as a result of being suicidal myself, which was 100% occupationally related. At the time, I just could not handle what they were making me do that I thought was just an antithesis to healthcare. Like I got into this to really help and heal people. I didn't get into this to be a factory worker, to be a pill pusher, to give substandard care, to not help people with informed consent. I don't know. I did not want to be a little cog in the wheel that just made money for big corporate entities that didn't really care about human beings. So my way out of that without killing myself, was to open my own clinic, where I then, for the last 16 years up until I retired, was able to see everyone regardless of their ability to pay, give people 60-minute visits or more, actually be the doctor that I always thought in my mind that I would be. And so I guess besides just complaining about the system, I definitely know what the solutions are, because I've enacted them for myself and helped other communities launch ideal clinics as well. So I can speak to all of these things.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like a little like we're kindred spirits a little bit. My dad's an anesthesiologist. So I grew up in a doctor house like you did. And I found sort of my calling by getting injured by psychiatric medications and then going public and talking about it. And like you, how you get a million phone calls a day about doctor suicides, it's the same. I get contacted frequently about psychiatric drug harms and illness and that kind of thing. So I think first I want you to talk about the ideal medical care movement, about, you said you opened your own clinic and you could provide this ideal medical care and you know what that looks like. But I think for people to better understand what ideal medical care is, like, can you tell us what you think is broken about the medical system and why we need ideal medical care?
Well, ideal medical care is defined by the patient. I mean, obviously, the patient is not the doctor, and I have all this wealth of knowledge, and so do other physicians from their training. But, just having the knowledge in your head doesn't help you deliver healthcare in a way that's respectful and honoring of the person in front of you. And so I wanted to remove all the third parties and just allow the patient to have like the final say so about what is an ideal clinic for them. Like, I don't want to hold somebody hostage to my beautiful idea of what I think they need. And I don't want myself and the patient to be held hostage to a third party, like a big corporate medical clinic that doesn't really care about either one of us and couldn't care less whether I died by suicide and the patient died by poor medical care. Because let's just face it, there's a long line of sick patients and a long line of physicians willing to take my place, especially these resident physicians from overseas. I don't know if I just want to mention this really quick. These H1J1 physicians from overseas, they literally come here and their visas are attached to these abusive hospitals. And they have told me this is like akin to human trafficking. Like, they literally cannot even get out of these hospitals without being fired, deported, sent back home, and having their lives, sort of upended. So that's why they end up choosing suicide over humiliation and deportation. So I think you have to understand, like, yes, this is a system in which money is being made from illness and even human trafficking of doctors, as hard as that is to believe. Like, we get a lot of doctors from overseas. They've never been to the United States. They don't even have a handle on English. Like, there are a lot of victims here. And that's why we've got sort of tiers of victims. So my only way out of this, I thought, was to put the patients in charge. Because I knew I was miserable as a doctor and that I felt suicidal, but I couldn't think my way out of it. So I was like, let me just leap of faith here. I love where I live, Eugene, Oregon. Let me just I love my patients. Like, let me just ask them what they want. Like, I wonder if I put the patients in charge, what they would want. And it was super cool. I did like several town hall meetings and I got 100 pages of written testimony, and people literally told me like their wildest dreams, like if they could create their ideal clinic, if we hit the lottery, if we could have anything we want. And literally all people want, it's so crazy that we don't even need to hit the lottery. All they want is eye contact, your heart, your attention, and the answers to their medical problems. Like, people always ask me, well, what's the secret to a successful practice? The secret to a successful practice is solving people's medical problems. Like, how easy is that if you have 60 minutes and you can really listen to them? And so I just thought it was like amazing, beanbag furniture, little futon, little 280 square foot office. I literally opened my office that was designed entirely by the community for $627. And I was able to give them everything they wanted, pretty much 90% or more of what they wanted, and all these 100 pages of feedback. And that was ideal medical care. They defined it. It's not It's not my definition. And it
But
would
how
maybe
did you,
be different in different communities. It could be a little different. Like maybe
yeah.
ideal medical care in New York City might be a little different than like Hippieville, South Eugene, Oregon. You know what I mean? But like by and large, people just want answers to their medical questions and kindness and respect.
Yeah. But how did you, I mean, I don't want this to come out wrong, but there's so many doctors that like don't take the patient voice into consideration. And I may have been guilty of that as a PA when I was practicing too. Like you just are going through the motions and do, you know, maybe you're working for some big corporate place or whatever, and you're so busy. And the only way that I came to know how screwed up the medical system was to be a patient in it that got horribly damaged. So how did you come to that place where you're like, oh yeah, I mean, it sounds so common sense, but it's not routine to ask the patients what they want. So where did you come up with that idea to do that?
Well, I had like 6 jobs in 10 years after my, basically after I graduated from medical school. And like I said, both my parents are physicians. So I saw medicine in its heyday when it actually worked. Like I saw my patients really have, my parents actually have time to take care of their patients. My mom's a psychiatrist and my dad's a pathologist. I used to go to the morgue and work with him in there, but he also worked at a methadone clinic with like people getting off the heroin. He also worked at the jail, so I was able to like watch like a real doctor who really cared about people with DUIs who were like going to be checked in at the local jail. He really cared about people getting off of heroin. Like I sat with him as a little grade schooler and got to like watch and interact with my dad dealing with people who are really struggling in super vulnerable positions, including seeing dead patients, so I guess I really saw the reality of medicine and what it could be if you had caring doctors who had time, because that's just the main thing that's lacking is time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I had graduated, I just never fathomed they would try to put me on an assembly line in 7 to 10 minute visits, because that wasn't my 1970s, idealized view of medicine that was based on reality from 1970s, right? And so I'm not one of these people that's just going to like suck it up and keep doing a job that I hate. So I would just leave lots of jobs thinking the grass would be greener somewhere else. But of course, as you know, all these jobs are just kind of same shit, different building, sorry to curse, but so I just was like, I got suicidal and depressed because like my life purpose, it's not like being a banker or working at Starbucks or PetSmart where you could just like go to a different dog grooming outlet or get a different job at a different coffee shop. Like when you go into medicine, like it's such a commitment of time and energy, and it's usually a deep soul's calling. And so I just felt like my soul had been slaughtered in this whole process. I wasn't able to, at the end of the rainbow, I wasn't able to like actually be a healer. And so I got depressed and suicidal. So when you ask like, how did I come up with this idea? It was from a state of complete like emotional collapse and suicidality, where it just, I was in bed for 6 weeks and I couldn't get up. And then I actually had like a prophetic dream that woke me up that showed me that I needed to do town hall meetings and ask patients what they want. I know that's like really weird, but like, I mean, what was that? I was either going to do that or just die, or like I had to come up with some reason to live. And I guess in the dream state of just total ego surrender, when you feel like, what are you going to do? And you just give up. God spoke to me, a dream came to me. I don't even know like how to describe it, but the point is I had a prophetic inspiration that I couldn't solve my own problems. I couldn't figure out how to be the healer that I wanted to be, and maybe my patients could help me. So I just literally told like my town, like, hey, I love you guys. I have a medical license. It's not working for me. I'm depressed. It must not be working for you. Let's recreate this whole thing and do it our way.
Wow. I wish we could do that all over the world. We so need to. Do you think that it's something that could be reproduced everywhere? Is that just like dream
No,
type?
I've helped like about 600 doctors recreate this in all different parts of the US and the world. And even a hospital system hired me to come in to be on their executive team to recreate this at a hospital level in Wisconsin, which was super cool. We got like, I did 13 town hall meetings in 48 hours and we got like I don't know, 2,730 pieces of qualitative data that they could enact. Most of them were like cheap or free things that they could easily do in their hospital, just to deliver truly patient-centered care, not just lip service and billboards like we love our patients, but actually doing what people want. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of what people want, let's talk about informed consent, because I know everybody who's watching who, relates to our film and feels like they were not provided informed consent about the true risks and harms of psychiatric medication or maybe some other medications. We have people interested in our film who took fluoroquinolones who feel like they weren't warned, et cetera. So you wrote an article that I read, and we'll post it for people in the comments, about how you feel like you were trained to violate your patient's right to informed consent. Can you tell people how doctors are trained to violate patients' rights to informed consent?
Well, I think a lot of medical training is obviously sponsored and paid for by various third parties who have a conflict of interest inherent, like when you have the pharmaceutical companies funding research, funding medical education in various ways, sponsoring. Even when I went through, because I went through I finished residency in 96, like it was just common for like drug sponsored dinners and drug sponsored, pharma sponsored trips to Hawaii. Not that I took any of them, but I did go to some of these drug dinners mostly to sort of argue with them and figure out like what the truth was. And, like at the end of the day, like if drug companies are literally, let's just say it, bribing doctors, and there's a financial incentive to either not know the risks because you're so busy, and the drug reps certainly aren't telling you the risks as much as they are telling you the benefits, right? And dropping off all these free samples of the latest, greatest new medication that's going to be experimented on your group of patients, there's all the pressure in the world to use meds as a quick fix when you only have 7 to 10 minute visits, and you've been essentially indoctrinated by the pharmaceutical industry in your training. And so the main thing I want like the non-physician listener to understand is that just imagine me and others like me when we were teenagers and we decided to go pre-med. Like we actually just really wanted to help people. Like you're talking about good souls, good-hearted people who happen to do well in science, probably a nerdy group of people that weren't like jocks and weren't, druggies in high school. Like we literally were in the group of people that just like studied after school and did our homework. And we actually just care about people and want to help people. So we are super naive humanitarians who are easily victimized by a system that has really mapped out our psychology to the point where they can truly orchestrate a premeditated dehumanization process on us, so that they take these wonderful people who all they want to do is just help and heal patients, and they get them to betray themselves and their own morals to the point where they don't even have firm footing on their own foundation through primarily exhaustion. And like it's like a cult. It's like a cult, like you get inducted into a cult. And so at the end of the day, I think it is truly counterproductive for patients and physicians to be lashing out at each other. Like we are allies and PAs and NPs in needing to understand that we are all truly being victimized by a system of premeditated dehumanization, mass betrayal of human beings and animals, this ridiculous vivisection that just murders so many animals along the way, when really what we need is clean air, clean food, healthy, healthy living. Like there's so many things that we can do that don't involve mass murder, but there's so much more money to be made by mass murder and mass maiming people in a sort of depopulation scheme that I see that's going on anyway. So
yeah. Well, I say all the time, like when I meet people who are angry at doctors, I was pissed off too at first when I figured out what happened to me and how I wasn't warned or told and that kind of thing. But I say like the doctors are victims too, in some sense. But what I don't understand is like, and maybe you can help us with that, is when the patient then figures out what's wrong and it's an iatrogenic injury, one, caused by medicine. Let's say the benzodiazepines, for example. The doctor wrote them a prescription for it. They left them on it for 5 years with no warning that they could develop physical dependency and a severe withdrawal syndrome. And the patient goes back to the doctor who, the part that's forgivable, I think, is the not knowing, because the system sort of sets them up to not know. But then when the patient presents them with paperwork or journals or, things and says, well, it says right here, like the benzos can cause this. We hear all the time that the doctors say, like, that's ridiculous. It can't cause that, like anything to just sort of silence the patient and get them out of the office as quick as possible. Or this sort of like, I know best, I'm the doctor, you're the patient type attitude. Where does that come from, you think?
I think that's like a defense mechanism for somebody that's like facing reality. The fact that it's easier for them to kind of blow off that one patient than to reckon with the fact like, wow, I've been duped and scammed in an industry that I've spent 30 years as a doctor in. And, it's easier to blow off that one patient than to start accepting the tsunami of tears that would naturally come out from the grieving process of realizing that you've maimed and harmed hundreds of thousands of people maybe over your career, and that you were duped into this. You know what I mean? So I think it's like an inability to grieve the reality of the situation that the doctor is in, having been indoctrinated to the point of now harming people, which couldn't have been further from their mind when they went into the medical field on their personal statement going into medical school. So I just think it's like an inability to grieve the tragedy that the doctor feels trapped in, because let's just face it, they probably have a house with a mortgage payment and, spouse and kids and private schools, and, have to keep making this, they feel like they have to keep doing this 7-minute increment, seeing patient, like they can't like suddenly figure out how to get out of the cult of the medical mafia that they're in. And so because they can't figure it out and they don't have any time to figure it out, sadly, it's easier for them to blow off the patient than to reckon with the truth.
Yeah, or blame the patient. Yeah, it's a very human thing when you lay it out like
They're
that. Like,
I mean, they're just overwhelmed.
Well, and all of us are guilty of, we don't like to be wrong. It doesn't feel good to not be right about something, and so a lot of people will dig in their heels and do anything to defend their position, that cognitive dissonance type place, whether you're a doctor or just, a regular person, I think.
Right.
So on the informed consent piece, then, how do we protect patients? So we know that, they're not getting the best informed consent from their doctors now. Like, what kind of advice do you have for patients who are trying to navigate this system and advocate for themselves? What do they do to get informed consent?
So I think the one place where it's really challenging would be like, if it's an emergency and you have lost consciousness and you're not going to be able to it's kind of hard to give informed consent then anyway, because like you're not in your right state of mind. But I think the majority of medical care in this country, 90% or more of it, happens with people who don't need to make a super urgent decision. They're presented with a solution that the doctor says, take this purple pill, or, hey, I'm going to send you for an MRI with contrast, right? And so that's your opportunity to say like, hey, what contrast? What are the options? Like, this is going to go in an IV, like to ask questions. And I think at minimum, patients need to leave with like the diagnosis and the name of the treatment, if it is a drug, or if there's anything that's ever going to be injected into your bloodstream, your body, your muscle tissue, orally, and anything that's going to be inside your body, it is up to you to actually, thank God we have the internet, to actually Google it. And you can go down to any pharmacy and get the insert to any medication and read it. It's like 5-font print. You'll need a magnifying glass, but it is up to us as patients to really understand the risks and benefits of any procedure or medication that's suggested, and to ask appropriate questions.
Yeah. So finally, a doctor that says it's okay to turn to Google, because I can't tell you how many. Have you seen the meme that says, like, don't confuse your, what is it, your internet Google search with my medical degree or something?
Yeah.
But then the patient response was like, don't confuse your medical degree with my 20 years of living with it or something. I think that's one thing I learned too from being an injured patient, is that, oh yeah, the people who are living with this condition, whatever it is, and all those people on the internet and in support groups and stuff like that, that's valuable information. If the doctors would turn to it and really look at what is happening in these groups and what the patients are reporting, because a lot of times they know their bodies best and they have a lot of the answers to, the problems that they're experiencing. So before I probably would have written it off or not realized how valuable it is. But now, being a patient who's a part of it, I think it's really important that we realize how important the internet is,
And it's not just kind of like going randomly to the internet. I want to help people with more of a targeted approach. Go to PubMed, which is PUBMED. That is the library of all medical literature. That's what doctors look at. Like, they, with their medical degrees, go on PubMed. So you, without your medical degree, can go on PubMed. You might have to look up some of the words because they're complicated. You might not be familiar with them all. But the point is, you can get primary source information from research, cutting edge on your condition and the suggested treatment for your condition. So it's not like you're randomly just going to CNN or Fox News or whatever, like you're going to the same sources the doctors are going to.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice. All right. Well, since our film is about psychiatric medications and, the potential harms, and you do a lot of work with physicians, I want to know what you think about why doctors are afraid to speak out about having mental health conditions or taking psychiatric meds themselves. We get a lot of secret emails behind the scenes from doctors and PAs and nurse practitioners who don't want to come forward and tell their story that they were harmed by psych meds. So can you help people who are listening understand why that is?
Yeah, because interestingly, physicians are considered like a safety sensitive profession, I think is the term that's used. So like, we do not have any HIPAA rights. In fact, when we sign for our medical license, we sign away our HIPAA rights, and small font print, it'll say, by the way, we're going to have access to every document from every, doctor, psychologist, this, that, or the other thing. Sign on the dotted line. You're waiving your HIPAA rights because we need to basically protect the public from you. So the purpose of medical boards and nursing boards is to protect the public from these healers, okay? Health professionals. So their job and what keeps them employed is to continue to find doctors that are getting in trouble according to them, right? And then they have this whole physician's health program, which is this sort of glorified 12-step for everyone program, whether you have mental health or substance use issues. It's just ridiculous, because obviously if physicians cannot get mental health care, which that would be the group of people that probably, between police, firefighters, and doctors and veterans, need the most health care in the country for their mental health, and to prevent them from getting it by basically taking away their license, prevents them from getting the help that they need, and then causes them to want to drink more or do counterproductive things to try to medicate themselves. And so, sometimes they write their own prescriptions, which is a terrible way to do things. And as a result, you have physicians who are really struggling, and they're undertreated, untreated, mistreated, and they're suffering the same fate as patients, but they're just having a lack of access to care overall. And so I feel like anyone who's been injured by a psych med that is a health professional would have a lot of reasons not to speak out.
Yeah, makes sense. So in the same sense, though, I was thinking about it like, well, so doctors don't seek help because they're scared of the repercussions. But in the same sense, like those same doctors are encouraging their patients to seek help from this same system. But when you think about it, like even people who are regular people, and who enter into the psychiatric system, like they're at risk of a lot of repercussions too. I just had a friend recently who, because she was on psychiatric medications and is in withdrawal from them, which if you know anything about coming off of these things, they can make you extremely anxious, and like you can start having behaviors that are not normal, and you're at risk for like being locked up in a mental facility just because you're trying to get yourself off a medication that you're physically dependent on. So that's a prime example. Like the police show up at your house because your mom called the cops on you because you're acting weird from trying to come off of your psych meds, or you go see your primary care physician and you have this diagnosis written in your chart. And if you look at studies, they say that just having a psychiatric diagnosis means that you're going to get substandard medical care. I think about maybe like the woman who's in a custody trial with her husband who might use like her bipolar diagnosis, whether it's real or not, against her to try to gain custody of the kids, that kind of thing. So how can the medical field sort of try to encouraging their patients to seek help from this system that they're afraid to seek help from too because of repercussions?
I mean, how they can do this, and I mean, morally and ethically, it's absurd, but I mean, how they do it is they're just locked in the system themselves. So like all they can think of as an answer is like, go to psychiatry. And a lot of doctors haven't necessarily experienced psychiatry on their own because they're trying to self-medicate. So, but the point is it's pretty much a disaster, and beyond they're essentially weaponizing psychiatry and psychiatric diagnoses against people while potentially maiming them with medication without informed consent. So this not only can play out in a divorce and a custody battle with basically what I call patient profiling, which is profiling a patient as a drug addict or something like that, or a nutcase. I mean, I had a patient who was dying, who needed death with dignity, which is physician assisted suicide, legal in Oregon. I mean, he literally was down to 90 pounds and his joints were all opening and leaking all over. I mean, he was dying, right? And he needed death with dignity, which you need two doctors to basically approve it, just I guess so they don't have one doctor out killing people. Like you have to, it's a safety mechanism. So two doctors have to agree that you're terminal and you can take the suicide pill, right? And this other doctor had agreed when I talked to him, and the next day he changed his mind. He said, wait a minute, as I recall, this guy is a psych case. He like changed his mind and discriminated against this guy, mostly because he lived out in the woods and had a different lifestyle and wasn't kind of a mainstream type of a guy. I think that is just so terrible, like that you would use a like people with real psychiatric diagnoses do have terminal illnesses that will end in death, that deserve death with dignity just like anyone else. So that's like, there you go. Psych discrimination can come from other health professionals, can come from, the courts, the legal system. Also, if you're applying for disability insurance, they will pull your medical records and deny your disability insurance because you have a psych, diagnosis. So, and even before like Obamacare or whatever, they used to not pay for psych diagnoses as the first diagnosis on a claim. And so you could be discriminated against in a gazillion ways. So yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. And we've cast the net so wide with the ever-growing DSM that literally just like having a pulse at this point is a psychiatric diagnosis, feeling sad after someone died for more than 2 weeks, you're diagnosable. Like there's so many things that could get you caught in that system if you're not careful, and if you don't know, if you don't have informed consent about what walking into psychiatric care could mean long term, then you can find yourself in situations where, yeah, you are discriminated against, or you have adverse outcomes that you didn't expect just because you went to get help, essentially. I did read an article that you wrote too, though, that you said that like 75% of medical students and residents are on psychiatric medications, like antidepressants and stimulants. Is that because they're not practicing yet, that they're taking all those meds and they can get away with it without being monitored by the medical boards? Or like, how are so many med students on meds?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, like the caffeinated med student, drinking like 5 espressos a day or whatever is probably pretty common, Red Bull and all that, which is a drug, okay, which revs you up, right? Then the Adderall, because if they complain at all in their med school, a lot of med schools have like on-site psychiatrists now who will basically dose these kids and diagnose them with ADHD and give them Adderall or whatever. Because why do they do that? And residencies do that too, because you're basically being used as cheap labor, right? And in residency, they want you to keep working 28-hour shifts, and human beings just can't generally do that unless they're caffeinated or drugged. So they are happy to drug and caffeinate you to keep you working, so they can make a lot of money off of you. In medical school, the driver is more like, hey, they need certain numbers of test scores, certain like metrics they want to meet to show that their school is like a good school. So they can't have people dropping out with psych issues and underperformance. And because everyone else is using stimulants, like the person who isn't using stimulants like will fall behind potentially, unless you're just photographic memory good test taker, right? So it's kind of like if everyone in an Olympic sport was using steroids, the people who weren't would fall behind. So it pressures everyone to be drug ridden, to be able to just cope with the day-to-day survival of test taking and working these ungodly 28-hour shifts that are legal, that residents work. So I think that's kind of what forces it to happen. And they're also threatened, like any physician who doesn't kind of toe the party line will be written up as disruptive, unprofessional, sent to a psychiatrist, and literally psychiatry weaponized against them and doped up to stay in the program.
Wow.
I mean, it's insane.
Yeah,
like it's forced drugging, basically.
It's really concerning to me, though, because I didn't know, I guess, how powerful and how mind-altering psychiatric medications were until I took them myself and was harmed by them. But in order to practice and have like a diagnosable condition, you have to have a psychiatrist that you're seeing and that writes the prescriptions for you. But it's like we're saying, like, for example, benzodiazepines, if you talk to some of the experts on that, they'll say, well, that's alcohol in pill form, essentially. But you can go and you can practice medicine on benzos. You can take them all day long, as long as you have a prescription for them and you're seeing a psychiatrist, but you couldn't go to work and see patients drunk, But I don't necessarily, like, knowing what I know now about the drug class and that kind of thing, and antidepressants too, like how I've met physicians who said when they took them, they had like memory problems and they had like falling asleep at work and that kind of thing. So it's concerning to me, like thinking that, oh, maybe my cardiologist is taking, psychiatric meds when they're operating on me or something. What do you think about like being able, it's sort of like flying a plane, should we have some kind of rules on like what medications people can be taking when they're practicing medicine, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the reason why people end up on these medications is they're in a hazardous working environment to begin with, and there's
Yeah.
no downtime to really cope with the death and the grief and the 28-hour shifts. So, like, if we really wanted non-impaired physicians, which impairment, like psychomotor retardation, begins around 17 hours. If you're up 17 hours working, you are pretty
Right.
much like working under a DUI environment anyway. Like, you literally are as good as drunk because your
Yeah.
reflexes are impaired. And so they put these doctors on 28-hour shifts, which is causing the impairment. And then I think what doctors are doing is trying to take Adderall and uppers and downers to try to cope with the downwind effects of their hazardous working conditions with a lack of labor laws. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like, do you see how that's like piling one problem on top of another? And
Yeah.
I just don't think, the majority of times, sadly, I don't think patients are getting optimal care, and they're definitely in many situations not even getting safe care. And certainly I have rarely seen informed consent take place in, say, the standard medical office where you have, or urgent care, or any of those places. You only get like 10, 15-minute visits. Like, how can you actually get informed consent in a
Yeah.
10-minute visit? It's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of, I mean, whether it's, I mean, you're giving all great examples about like doctors and what they're facing and how it's really the environment around them that is broken and needs to change. But that's so many parallels to being a non-doctor too. Like people are just drugged for, being a single parent, or it's like not having enough money and they're, struggling financially, or just the way that the world is today. It's a hard world that we live in with all the mass shootings and all these things. And instead of like looking at everything around us that's broken and why we're suffering, we just say like, give the person pills, that is the quote unquote solution. So,
Yeah, it's
um,
a very sick society. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Especially drugging the young people. It's like, we're going to drug inattentive children. We're going to drug children that have too much energy. We're going to drug children who are sad because their parents got divorced, whatever, like, it's just the go-to strategy. I don't know if you saw recently, I posted that a pediatric resident in Florida told me that in the pediatric ICU that she was working in, like half the beds, well, it's full, and half the beds are suicide attempts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
So
wonder how much of that is, related to the over diagnosis and over prescription of psychiatric meds. In kids, we don't know long term what these medications do to people. I mean, I don't know if you've read any of like Robert Whitaker's book, but he talks about how psychiatric drugs definitely like increase severity and chronicity of mental illness, and they actually mimic the symptoms of the thing that you're trying to treat. So like benzodiazepines, for example, in the long term make people way more anxious than they were to begin with, even though they're anti-anxiety medications. So he does hypothesize that maybe all of these medications and overtreatment is what's resulting in our mental health crisis. But similarly, I wanted to ask you, I saw, since you do so much around doctor suicide, one of the physicians who's on the board of Benzo Info Coalition, which is a nonprofit that I work for about the risks of benzodiazepines, he did a study and he showed that benzodiazepines was one of the top 3 risk factors of the things that they looked at in physicians for physician suicide. So it was like being deemed unfit to practice was one of the reasons, being in solo practice. And then the third was if the physician was taking a benzodiazepine, they were more likely to suicide as well. So I wondered, in your work dealing with so many physicians who contact you who are suicidal, do you see that benzodiazepine element? Do you see psychiatric drugs playing a part in suicidality in
yeah,
the doctors that you talk to?
Yeah, I know of several cases that are purely related to benzo withdrawal that led to the doctor's suicide. And I think a lot of the issue not only is what's going on with the black box warning that isn't on some of these black box warnings that should be on there are not on there. And so people just don't know. And then they're being maybe harmed by the medication, but they're also being harmed by lack of follow-up. And the fact that you're on a medication, people think, oh, here's the solution to your problem is the medication. They're not addressing the underlying cultural issues, the hazardous working conditions. Like by giving you this little purple pill, they're literally deflecting attention from the real solution to the real underlying non-pharmacologic issues that have created your mental health problem.
Yeah. You said in one of your books that your mom, who is a psychiatrist, she sent you antidepressants when you were a med student. I wonder if you took them or like how you escaped the trap of just being medicated yourself with all of the problems that you faced.
Yeah, well, yeah, I couldn't stop crying in medical school, and neither of my parents could help me because they're not really emotionally and spiritually accessible as people, probably due to their own medical education trauma. You know what I mean? They've been like severed at the heart and soul. So I could not get the help that I need by crying on the phone with my parents. They basically were like, oh, isn't that too bad? You know, my dad just had some like whatever little pep talk he gave me that led nowhere. And my mom, who has zero tolerance for crying as a psychiatrist, zero tolerance, very low empathy because of just her own issues, right? Her like she basically will just like fold her arms and look at you and just give you drugs to shut you up. I mean, that's like my mom's go-to, you know, if I'm struggling. As well as blaming me for my own problems. Right. So anyway, she just mailed me like trazodone in the mail is what she did. So I would basically stop. So I'd stop crying on the phone with her. I think that was like, you know, how am I going to get her to shut up? So she sent this to me and with no instructions, you know, it was just like pills in a bag. Like there were no instructions. I didn't get informed consent from my mom about what I was taking. My mom didn't tell me anything. She just said, take one before bed. Like I think that's all she said. I was like, well, how many should I take? She said, just take one. Well, I took one before going to bed one night, but right after I took it, I went to go empty my trash at the apartment complex, like down the stairs into the dumpster kind of thing. And I literally almost collapsed and fell down the stairs because like literally with trazodone, you better be standing next to your bed because it'll knock you out immediately. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know. She didn't tell me like, it works that quickly. You know what I mean? I just thought, oh, take it like a half an hour before you go to bed, you know? And so I didn't take it anymore because first of all, I was scared that it would just knock me out and I live alone. I thought this was unsafe. You know what I mean? To live alone. And then second of all, it's pretty clear to me that I was depressed because of the absolute terror and brutality of my medical education and not because I had a chemical dysfunction in my brain. And so that was not being addressed by either of my parents on the phone. And I didn't think that taking a pill that would knock me out and cause me to fall down the stairs was the solution. So I think I took it like maybe twice. And then I was just like, this is stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know which specialties of medicine are most the highest in suicide, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, anesthesiology is number one. Also, veterinary medicine is probably above anesthesiology, and then surgeons and emergency medicine. And the reason why veterinary medicine and anesthesia are so high is because they have easy access to painless, lethal means. And let's just face it, these drugs are dangerous. And if you are suffering and you have access to them easily, you could knock yourself out in 10 seconds, 30 seconds, less than a minute.
Is psychiatry pretty up there on the list as well?
Psychiatry is the highest non-hospital based, you know, like after emergency medicine is OBGYN. They're in the hospital delivering babies and maternal deaths and stillborns. And, you know, that vicarious trauma can really throw you for a loop. But out of all the non-hospital based specialties, psychiatry is number one.
Wow.
And number 5 on the list of all specialties.
Wow. Okay.
because they hear a lot of trauma all day long, and then they're just like sort of doping people up, and they're not even getting trained to do like real therapy with patients anymore. They're literally just like, I know a psychiatrist in my town that sees 6 patients per hour, and they're really medically complex psych patients. But how can you just refill meds in 10-minute increments all day long on schizophrenics and patients who are truly like suffering major psychiatric conditions?
Yeah.
I
And
think
be
it's
giving, that's, I can't, I
ridiculous.
mean, it's not good care at
Yeah,
all. Yeah.
it's
But
ridiculous.
so let's, I guess, talk about the solutions then, because you provide confidential retreats for physicians who are having trauma and who need to recover from trauma. And I feel like, at the end of the day, we're all human, whether we wear a white coat or we went to, PA school or med school. And I feel like if your retreats are, working, maybe that's something that can be applied to regular people as well. So, non-doctors, what do you do in your retreats that's helpful for physicians? Like, what could we learn from your system?
So first of all, like, I definitely think what I have learned over 10 years of studying doctor suicides could be extrapolated to other demographics like veterans, teenagers, over-medicated, iatrogenically damaged people, so the number one thing that I think all people need is peer support. Like everyone, that's why these chat rooms and Facebook groups are so popular. Like if you have gadolinium injury from having IV gadolinium inserted in you, and now you have a rare earth metal settling in all your organs, but nobody told you it was going to happen and destroy your life. Like you really need, in order to know that you're not like losing your mind, you really do need to find other people who are having the same situation so that you can ground yourself in the reality of a peer group. So number one is there needs to be peer support, and that could be easily happening on Zoom.
Mhm.
So I think peer support is the first thing for most people. And then for a while, I was doing retreats with 30 to 50 doctors at a time, but they were more like launch your ideal clinic type retreats. And I didn't quite realize how much trauma these people had. So at the first night, I would do a little sort of trauma healing for a few hours and then go straight into the business strategy. But I don't think most people can progress until they really deal with the trauma. They can't move forward with their life, which is probably what you're seeing. There's a lot of people that have a lot of contained trauma that end in iatrogenic illness, because that's on top of something that was already happening. Like they're
Mhm.
iatrogenically injured on top of the underlying thing that never got solved. Okay. And so these people need each other, number one, and they need to like let go of the trauma so they can actually proceed with a normal life in any way, shape, or form, like personal or professional life outside of medicine, just regular people. And so I think having, I don't really like to do the 30 to 50 people at a retreat because it's just like, it becomes like a frat party, it's like too chaotic. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone loves it. I get exhausted and it's
Mm.
not like targeted enough. But what I think would really work is I started to do retreats with 7 or less doctors at a time, but they're curated. So they're all coming for the same thing. So like if you have, for example, to migrate into your topic, if you had 7 people that were iatrogenically injured by gadolinium IV
Mhm.
contrast material, like they should be in a support group where they can really bond together. I think if you have too many people, it just becomes chaotic. If you had 25, 30 people in a support group, that's too many people because you need people to be able to share their story. And the way I do it is they come on Zoom and they share up to 500 words every week of the trauma that they're experiencing, which, let's just face it, if you've been injured by a medicine, it's playing out in your life in a lot of different ways. So you could probably come up with a lot of different 500-word essays about
Oh,
what
yeah.
you're struggling with. And you
Mhm.
share one every week and then get feedback from other people who help oh, like I went through that too. Here's what I tried. It's peer support. And so
Mhm.
you feel like validated, you feel heard, you also get strategic ideas from other people who have had similar pain. And then the personal retreats that I do now, because I really like them the best, is where somebody who really wants more attention than just these group visits, like which I do 2 hours a week on Sundays, trauma recovery groups. There are
Mhm.
certain people that like really just want more attention. And I encourage them to come with like their spouse if they want, with the other people in their family who've witnessed this injury or whatever, to like a spa retreat center, like a hotel that's like in a beautiful place, like on the Oregon coast, right? And then I do this whole healing process with them where we kind of try to track back the trauma to the originating wound, which is often in the family of origin, in a certain psychological dynamic that's set up by either an inattentive parent, a parent that wasn't able to meet their needs somehow. Not that the parent was bad, but there was just a mismatch in the needs that the child had and what the parent was delivering. And so that sets up this very weird cycle where you have sort of a neglected, desperate, or abused sort of child that then starts getting into these weird coping mechanisms where it can play out in physical symptoms. They can have chronic migraines, but is it really that they have a brain problem, or is it like the emotional problem from childhood that's playing out in migraines or abdominal pain or vaginismus, like can't have sex, can't have orgasms? Look, there's all these things that are happening that probably track back to childhood. And so I think it's harder to do that in a group, like even with 7 equally injured people from the same psych drug. So I personally think like what I love the most is, and what's helped the most, which anyone can do on their own, is to start writing your life story. I feel like if everyone were to write like their memoir, not publish it necessarily, but their life story of pain and trauma, starting from the earliest pain that they can remember, and then get facilitated help to help them fill in the blanks of what they don't understand about the various chapters of their lives, then you can kind of see how the whole thing makes sense and put, for lack of a better metaphor, the jigsaw puzzle of their life together. Because I feel like all of us have this jigsaw puzzle in our life that's like 5,000 pieces, and most people only have like 10% of it put together, and it's just like a mystery why they're suffering. And then of course they end up at a doctor's office who's willing to then give them a number of iatrogenic illnesses on top of the incomplete jigsaw puzzle. So I think the real important thing is to have introspection and to be curious about like, what was the core wound that actually led you to have your mental health or physical health issue before you ever got to the doctor and ended up iatrogenically injured.
Yeah. That's really, really good advice, I think. So I read somewhere that there's some angry, mostly female psychiatrists who don't like what you're doing. Is that true? They don't like your work?
That's true.
How is that manifested, and why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's just, when you research wounded healer, you find that the archetype of the wounded healer is from the psychological realm. They did a study, I guess it was in Britain, where 85% of people who sought a career in psychology, like literally were in the field to solve their personal psychological problems. So out of any specialty, psychiatry is the one that attracts probably the most psychologically unwell people. And my mom is a perfect example of that, unfortunately. And so these people, there's actually an amazing book. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna show this to you. Hold on, I have it. This book has helped me more than any other book in my life understand what's going on with psychiatrists, because my mom is a mentally ill psychiatrist. Children of Psychiatrists and Other Psychotherapists. It explains, I have marked more in the borders of this book. I have like underlined almost every line in this book. I know like most people listening to your program here are not children of psychiatrists, but they have been injured by psychiatrists the very same way that psychiatrists will injure their own children. Because like I said, if I act up at home, my mom's go-to strategy is to drug me. You know what I mean? So that's what psychiatrists do. You go to a used car salesman, you get a used car. You go to a psychiatrist, whether you're a child, a patient, whatever, you get on psych drugs. You know what I mean? And I think it's really important, if people want to read this book, it's quite fascinating. But the problem is that psychiatrists, by and large, are wounded healers, more than orthopedic surgeons. If you ask an orthopedic surgeon, hey, why did you go into orthopedic surgery? They'll say, oh, high school volleyball. I injured my, fractured my tibia, went to orthopedic surgeon, fixed it. I thought it was cool. Yay. Thought I'd go into orthopedic surgery. There's no like psychological problem there. There's like, wow, I just think it's cool to fix broken bones, right? But people who go in psychiatry, they literally have most likely all of them have an underlying psychological problem that they're either aware of, or it's what he would call an encapsulated wound. So if you have a psychological problem that is like you're hiding it from yourself, so you've buried it, and now you're an expert in psychiatry. So you can put yourself out in the world as an expert while not revealing even to yourself your wound. And that's why you can do so much damage to others, children, patients, because you are like literally working from a place of hiding your own wounds. Okay. And so, so the reason why I think these people are upset with me is because, I don't know, I've been running a suicide helpline for free for 10 years. And I know probably I've been on the phone and talked thousands of hours with suicidal doctors. So I guess I've surpassed 99.99% of psychiatrists and their understanding of physician psychology and suicidality. So there's just like the ego bruising jealousy that comes with overtaking a profession without getting board certified or doing the residency. You know what I mean? Like, I just had a passion for this topic. So I think there's just ego bruising jealousy there. But then the other thing that's happening is, obviously through all of this, I'm exposing taboo topics that they don't want to talk about, like the absolute dysfunctionality of psychiatry. They don't want to hear about that. And believe me, talking about physician suicide 10 years ago when I started, if you were to Google doctor suicide, I was like the only one that came up on page 1 of Google for the most part, because guess what? Super taboo and nobody wants to talk about it. So I think I'm not going to be a really beloved person for people who don't want to talk about this topic. And I'm not going to be beloved by people who feel like, as the keynote speaker at a psychiatry conference, which I was, and got a standing ovation, that just pisses them off all that more. And it's just a small subset of mostly female doctors, because you know how females can be pretty vicious.
Yeah.
In a way that men really can't. I mean, maybe men go for guns and knives and like strong arm you physically or just let you go. But women can just be so vicious in a relational way, especially online. Yes. So that's what I've been dealing with.
Yeah.
It's okay. I can handle it.
Yeah. So I'm aware of the time. We've been talking for an hour, but before we go, I think I want to close with you telling us, we've talked about how screwed up the system is and how you came up with the idea of an ideal medical clinic and how that worked for you. But dealing with the system as it is today, we don't have ideal medical clinics everywhere, even though that would be wonderful. How do we exist in the system as it is currently? Like, how do patients push back against it? How do doctors say, like, I'm not doing this anymore? Like, how do we reform it?
So if there are any health professionals listening to this, I can absolutely help you launch your own practice within 30 days. And you could literally make more money helping more people working fewer hours. I know that sounds like hard to believe, but in these big box clinics, 75% of your revenue has been being given to your captors, like your predators. And so once you can release yourself from prison, which is a psychological phenomenon, then you literally can keep the money that you're earning, so you can actually charge people less and make more money. So it works out better financially for the patient and the physician to unlock themselves, unleash themselves from these systems. So that's what I would recommend for any physician, PA, nurse practitioner, coach. And you don't even have to have a medical degree. There's so much. Look, I literally, so there's my medical degree and all my little diplomas. I don't even have any of them. I mean, I have them on the wall, but then none of them are active because I actually gave up my medical license, retired it, but I'm still I'm like making more money now than I made as a doctor just doing coaching. So I want to say, anyone who has a passion for this, and you can be a patient who's been iatrogenically injured. I want to invite any patients who've been iatrogenically injured. If you want to start a coaching practice to help other patients, I will help you do that. And you can start to be the change. Like, what I'm saying is, you don't need a medical license, because a medical license will actually indoctrinate you in the wrong direction and lead away from healing. So this is my message for anyone who feels like they're a healer out there. Okay. And literally, if you've been injured and you are recovering, you're in the perfect situation to help people who are not as recovered as you. Like you can throw an SOS rope down to other people and lead a peer support group. And I'm happy to help you do that. For patients who are just like struggling too much and can't even think about being a resource for others because they just need too much help right now, just look for any type of healer that's in independent practice. I think the more you can get away from systems and just pay out of pocket a reasonable fee to a nurse practitioner, PA, physician, coach, trauma recovery specialist, whatever. I'm actually helping a physician right now open an iatrogenic injury clinic. Like she's only going to see patients who've been iatrogenically injured and help them recover, which is great. That's a great.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
So I think just keep your eyes open. Don't get locked in the system. Know that journaling, peer support, there's a lot of new people who are putting themselves out online, offering programs to help you, meditation, journaling. I mean, there are so many ways to heal. Just don't give up. I would say don't give up and don't stay in a relationship with a healer if it's not a healing experience. Like just feel free to experiment with a variety of people. And peer support is basically almost free. So start with that.
Such good advice. Thank you so much, Pam, for coming and talking. This has been fascinating. I just learned so much and I love so much of what you had to say, and what you're doing too is really, really important work. So thank you for doing it and being there for doctors and, people in the medical field who really need you. So yeah. Any last closing thoughts?
Last closing thoughts. I think the number one thing that tethers us to the planet is living our dream and connection with other people. So it's really important to keep asking yourself what brings you joy, what inspires you, because let's just face it, to take your next breath, you need to be like quite literally inspired. Like to keep breathing, you have to be inspired to want to live. So focusing on what brings you joy and not fear-based thinking. Try to, as soon as possible, break out of fear-based decision-making and go for your joy and stay connected to other people. Don't isolate. That's my number one piece of advice.
Okay. Awesome. So let's stay in touch, and I'll see you soon because we're going to do another Zoom later. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody who's tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us for this live discussion. If you have not seen Medicating Normal yet and you want to, you can go to medicatingnormal.com/watch. Also, you can check our events tab on Facebook for more interviews like this one. And lastly, if you'd like to support our outreach efforts to bring the film and more conversations like this one tonight to communities worldwide, you can make a donation at medicatingnormal.com/donate. So thanks so much again, Dr. Wible, for being here, and we'll talk soon.
Okay,
bye, everybody.
You. Bye.
Take care. Bye.